So what's up?
Um, I mean, saying what's up is after talking for like an hour and insulting each other is really non-productive. You can just pick a topic and we can talk about that.
All right. How about like how many dicks do you suck yesterday?
Well, it depends. Like these questions depend on, do I like them? Are they erect? Like you have to ask the right questions. So you know, some things are important.
So you don't like sucking flaccid cock?
No, it's unless the objective is to make it harder. It's not really a priority. Yeah, I wonder how this is gonna go on your channel. Anyways, yeah, what would you like to talk about, you disabled Lloyd?
I don't know, man.
Man, I really want to leave this place. It's just shit.
What, Charlottesville?
Yeah, it's just garbage.
Well, then fucking find a different place to live, man.
So here's the trick, right? In order to find a place to live, I have to. This is actually very interesting. You ready for it? I have to find a job in another place.
Oh yeah.
And after finding a job in another place, I move to that other place. The problem
Dude, right
is
now is not the time to be looking for a new job. Actually, to be honest, you should be pretty freaking happy that you're still employed, because like 22 million people have just lost their jobs.
yes, and the reason why they lost their jobs is mostly not because of them quitting or leaving
Of
their
course
work.
not. It's the fucking government shutdowns, man.
The major reason is the government shutdown. There are certain businesses that have been laying off people because no one's going shopping there. But also the most important thing is, yes, the government shut down unnecessary businesses. The government started. So yeah, that's.
It's just pretty crazy to me that people like they can't even comprehend of why people are protesting right now, right? They think, oh, the protesters are just stupid and selfish. They're just mad because they can't get a haircut or some stupid shit like that. They can't even comprehend that maybe these people just lost their jobs or their businesses. Like overall, they've lost their livelihoods through no fault of their own. They're essentially forced to shut down, or if they're not forced to shut down, they're getting no business because of the shutdowns. And now they got to put food on the table, and they think giving them $1,300 in 1 month is gonna somehow fix that, or like be that's gonna be a freaking reciprocal sort of like payment to like prop them up. It's like, no, I mean, one, when they get that money, it's not going to stimulate the economy. They're going to hold on to it for dear life because they're trying to friggin' save so that they have food on the table, right?
Well, it's still, I think it's still bad to save money while the government is printing money. Like, this is one thing that a lot of folks don't understand is, if the government is printing money, it's going to hurt everybody. And the way it's going to hurt everybody, it's not that it's just printing it and the new money somehow has more value. No, it just reduces the value of the dollar totally. And the way you can do that, and you can actually look at price of gold. Just look up price of gold and look at the charts that show you the gold prices over a span of years, or multiple years. Particularly if you find charts that actually show you the price of ounce of gold in U.S. dollars. What you actually want to extrapolate from it is not that a lot of people may look at it and say, "Oh, look, the price of gold is increasing." No, the price of gold doesn't increase as much. The value of the dollar decreases. Gold itself has a value in a lot of places. It has a value it literally has an objective value. That's the crazy thing about it, especially now. It's used in Silicon Valley and used in electronics. So you have all of these industries that are making it, and then you have some people who look at the dollar value of the gold and they say, "Oh, look, gold is going up that must be because gold is being consumed and gold is a valuable resource. So the fewer gold there is, the higher the value of gold it is. No, it's not being consumed at that rate. And actually, gold for pretty much all of our lives has been mined at relatively the same rate that it is being consumed. Like by relatively, I mean over the years. If you look at it, especially between maybe the 1990s and 2000s, you can actually look at the gold value in terms of the U.S. dollar, because in those years the government wasn't printing as much money. There wasn't like excessive spending. But after 2001, after the war, that's when the spending got kind of absurd.
We just start hemorrhaging money for no good reason.
Yeah, just starting with George Bush, and then Obama inherited $6 trillion, and then guess what he did with it? He grew it up to fucking $20 trillion, gave it to Trump, and Trump was like,
let's make that 40.
Let's just some rookie numbers. Let's get those numbers out. And now he's got them up. And a lot of Americans have no clue what's going on. All they know is that more money. What's something that is more interesting is this is something that I've noticed with people. They actually believe that wealth is the amount of money that you have.
Oh yeah.
They actually believe that. It's kind of absurd.
No, it doesn't matter if you have $1 million if all you can buy is a loaf of bread.
There's a reason why we use metrics such as GDP, gross domestic product. Why? Because it turns out wealth is created by higher rates of production. Production produces wealth, not monetary value of money. In fact, we have been proving time and time again that the value of money can be adjusted by a government like the United States that found a way to just mess with it. They have. And they have been messing with it, and they have completely destroyed the value of the dollar. Well, they haven't really completely
So what do you think of the idea of just moving away from government issued currency and just moving towards private currencies?
So there is. At first, we would say like that's not feasible. Like the idea that we can just, have our own bank and just trade with each other, but having a bank that actually issues this currency and respects its value, that would be nice and all. But then that bank cannot exist in a government that actually controls monetary value, in a government that has, control over money.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying is just abolish the dollar and just let friggin' essentially private currencies such as cryptocurrencies and whatnot let those reign supreme in the economy.
That would actually, if you had a country that government would not interfere with economics, you could do that very easily. The problem, and this is what is kind of scary for the United States particularly, which is the only way they can mitigate that is if they have totalitarian control over the internet, all of it, is that they can't really tax transactions that happen in Bitcoin. You can literally buy and sell whatever you want in Bitcoin. They cannot tax it. No way.
I've just started dabbling in Bitcoin. I got myself a Bitcoin wallet now. I don't have anything in it yet, so I guess I haven't even started. But
did you make a wallet on your computer or on the web?
No, it's in my Chrome browser.
Okay, so there's a few problems I think with it, and I haven't researched that very well. I don't know what would happen to them if you lose them. So
I'm pretty sure they're just gone. I'm pretty sure if I lose those Bitcoins, they've been taken.
Right. If you actually have to format your computer for some reason. It's broken, formatted, then it's gone forever. I see mobile phones, especially Apple phones, are more durable when it comes to that, because you rarely have to actually do that, have to format them, have to do these things to them. And actually, the most secure way is to host your own server and just have a wallet on it. So yeah, that's one potential option you can do it, although you have to pay for it to host that wallet and keep it running. So that's one disadvantage of that, but still more viable. I'm thinking about making a Linux machine that host it, so I can have can have my laptop and I can just host it and have a Bitcoin wallet on it. And I don't use my wallet, so I don't use my the laptop much, so it's less susceptible to hacking. It's less susceptible to any problems that could happen to it. Most of the problems don't usually happen due to hacking, but it usually happens due to the user fucking it up. So I can just leave it, not use it, just open it up to update it, and that's it. But yeah, cryptocurrency. The reason the government is scared of cryptocurrency and wants to regulate it is because they don't know what to do about it. It's literally out of their control.
Well, I mean, that's the point, is that ultimately this shit shouldn't have been in their control for the first place. The government shouldn't have access to our freaking bank accounts. The government shouldn't have access to all of our transactions. They shouldn't be able to like tax us just so we can do commerce with one another. That's ridiculous. Like, what part of me giving you $1 means that the government is owed it? Right?
So the reason they do that is the reason they keep taxing you like that is initially it started with you telling them how much you make, and then they tax you a proportion of your income to fund their, let's say, their essential program, which in my opinion, there's essential programs for the government are very simple. They're military, police, and justice system, and all of their derivatives. All those three branches and all of their derivatives. Those constitute the basic minimum that the government would have to protect individual rights. So they can tax on that, on funding these three programs, because ultimately every single one of us is benefiting from these programs, from having a well-structured government that keeps bad guys in jail, that makes these laws that make sure that we do not have infringement on one another's rights, that we don't have people who infringe on our rights, maybe someone hacking into your bank account and stealing your money or something like that. Cryptocurrency, I see the value of it came in right now. Well, not right now, I've seen it a while ago. Is that it's like the don't tread on me to the government. It's like a big fuck you to the government. By saying, no, I don't care what you think about me. I'm just going to run independently. I'm going to run independent of you. And the way they did it is they said, well, we don't have a central bank to control it. So what we're going to do is everyone is the bank. Every user who ever used it is the bank itself, has the history of all the transactions. This made it incredibly durable. It has made it so incredibly strong that it's just insane. And the fact that there's a finite value that you can mine, which corresponds to the number of, I believe it was the number of zeros in the hash map, is that if you generate the SHA-256 for the transaction record that actually goes in the blockchain, then you would have a finite number of zeros, and the miners would have to map this next number that will give them that finite number of zeros. So they have to figure out that transaction value that gives them the highest number of zeros in the hash, or the highest starting number of zeros. And once they do that they get rewarded with this coin, or a Bitcoin. So pretty cool.
Yeah, but it's kind of interesting, backpedaling back to stuff like the deficit and the economy and whatnot. These kind of issues, the reason why most people don't really give a shit about them, like especially the debt, no one gives a shit about the debt. And I think the reason why is because it doesn't really affect them immediately. Stuff like the shutdown, that will send people into the streets protesting, right? Angered that, their livelihoods have been stripped from them. But that's because there's immediate consequences. I don't think that most people are really thinking about, decades from now when eventually we're going to have to pay off our debt, right? Because I think the mindset of these people is that they're not really concerned about it, that either future generations will figure it out or will never pay the debt. I mean, obviously, just having the debt itself doesn't crash the economy. I mean, we've had this debt for like freaking for decades now, and we've been quote unquote fine. I mean, not really, but we've had the illusion of being fine for a long period of time. So people don't really give a shit about the debt. You know, they don't really care, or about government spending. You know, that's the thing is, you know, Republicans, they care a lot about keeping taxes low, because high taxes, that hits people's bottom line. That hits people's ability to put food on the table. That hits people's ability to pay for luxuries that they want, right? Because now they have less money to spend due to the high taxes. Of course, a freaking leftist is going to respond to that with, no, but now there's more services. But the thing is, the government cannot predict exactly how someone's going to be spending their money. So oftentimes there's a bunch of extraneous services that the person's not even going to be using, yet they're paying for. So they still have less money to spend other than what would have been spent to acquire, you know, certain items or services or whatnot. So, I mean, stuff like taxation, you know, that's definitely something that resonates with people. But spending, I mean, trying to talk about cutting spending will get you nowhere, either in a Republican Congress or in a Democrat Congress. And the reason for that is because no one really gives a shit. I mean, I think the only people who gives a shit are like maybe like Representative Thomas Massey or Ron Paul, or actually he's not even in government anymore, but Rand Paul, right? It's like there's like 2 people in government, 3 maybe, who actually like give a shit about spending. But I think the majority of people there they're not even interested. And I think it's because their constituents aren't even interested.
You're absolutely right, actually. You're pretty much summarizing what a big chunk of the book that I just read, and I think that it's a phenomenal book if you get the chance to read it. It's called Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. What it does is it actually explains to you how government interference in economics is always bad, no matter what. In fact, towards the end of the book, he says the role of government is supposed to be the protection of individuals from fraud and force. And the reason that it protects them from fraud and force is that so it maintains the market dynamics without messing it up.
Hazlitt sounds like he's channeling Mises right there.
Hazlitt is very much inspired by human action. Like his entire book is.
Yeah, I mean, because that was one of Mises' big points. Government is only there to protect against fraud and force.
So Mises actually, of course Mises mentioned that, but Hazlitt mentioned something really important, and he said a lot of people do not ever look at the adverse or secondary effects of any policy. What they do is they look at the immediate effects, and that's good enough for them. They never look at the adverse effects. They never look at the long-term effects. They never look at anything and say, well, that's stupid. So what the government does is he described the endless cycle of government becoming totalitarian, and that's why we call it political economy. Is the reason why government does that is because the government makes one policy that is stupid, and it uses that to make more policies that says, well, that policy didn't work. I'll have another policy that fixes that stupid policy that I made earlier, without realizing that the policy that they made earlier is the stupid one that they should say, well, I need to get rid of that, because they will never do it. They will never look at a policy and say, well, this is absolutely stupid. I need to get rid of it. What they do is they just keep making more policies.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing is, you know, some government solution creates a problem, and then instead of identifying that the problem was caused by their so-called solution, they're like, oh, now we got to address that by creating another government solution, which of course creates another problem. And that's, you know, the big fallacy of central planning is you cannot properly structure society from this from the bird's eye view of the despot, you know, because the bird's eye view of the despot is not actually a bird's eye view. You know, you might think you're becoming the Eye of Sauron when you climb to the top of the heap, but in reality, you're just blind and ignorant to the world, and you have to react based upon the policies and decisions set forth by your bureaucrats. And your bureaucrats are not necessarily going to be the most competent. And even if they were competent, they still aren't gods. They cannot predict all the intricacies of society. You know, society is a spontaneous order. An order evolved from chaos. To try and order that is in accordance with some... It is really, I mean, because it's already an order, right? So the big flaw there is that what they're trying to do is they're trying to force it into an order as they would see it, rather than as it is, right? They want to create society or reforge it in their image. And of course that creates a bunch of problems because their view of what the perfect society should be doesn't mesh with reality. And I think that's the fundamental problem is, that's why you have doctors being put in charge of the economy. It's like, oh, well, we got to prevent people from getting sick. And so therefore we got to make sure that people starve to death, right? It's a completely stupid way of organizing society. And it's because, they view themselves as experts. It's like, oh, we're epidemiologists. We're experts on preventing disease. So therefore, your economics doesn't matter. Your economy doesn't matter, right? So you value the economy over grandma's life? I mean, of course they say all these things without even realizing that the economy is literally just our spontaneous actions to preserve our lives. The reason why an economy exists is because people want to live, and they want to live better. That's what an economy is. It's just people desiring to live better and taking action to do so. By shutting that down, you are essentially butchering the baby to save the bathwater. You're like, oh, well, we got to save people from a virus, and so therefore we got a virus with a minuscule death toll, mind you. I mean, it's still tragic that people are dying from it, but still a very non-lethal virus to save people from a virus that has a very low death toll in proportion to who's getting infected. We gotta make sure that people are unable to provide for themselves and their loved ones. It's a completely ludicrous way of viewing society, but that's what most of these freaking solutions are. That's what the Great Depression, the famine in the Great Depression was caused because, FDR's his administration saw that the prices of food were dropping way down. There was a massive surplus. The farmers were financially struggling because the food prices were too low. So what was FDR's solution? We're gonna pay farmers to destroy their product to raise the food prices. And of course that worked. You restricted the supply, increased the price, because you increased scarcity. The only problem is that led to millions of people starving. It's like, oh, well, see, we there's this economic problem of prices too low. And so they instead embraced the solution of people dying over, less people dying. But that's the thing is they didn't predict that outcome because they didn't think about that outcome. They weren't thinking about what would happen if people couldn't get their hands on food. They were thinking about what would happen if the prices were too low. I don't know. Most of these people have such hubris. They see themselves almost as if they're some sort of like demigod. Like they have the right, and not just the ability, but the right to order society as they would see fit, rather than allowing people to find solutions themselves. And it just kind of sickens me.
You're pretty much reiterating what Mises says, human action. It's probably because reality is not different. But yeah, this is what you can take even the best case scenario for a government action. That's why I think it's really important to read economics in one lesson, because in the book he doesn't look at the government programs such as welfare state and all of that. He looks at simpler government programs like government loans or subsidies and whatever they actually add, what actually do to try to stimulate or improve the economy.
Well, that's the thing is, a massive portion of our debt right now is becoming student loan debt. I mean, student loan debt. And the reason for that is because we're having all these people taking out massive loans for this useless shit that's not going to give them any actual marketable skills, like fucking gender studies or some bullshit oh, I want to be an anthropologist. It's like, who the fuck needs anthropologists? The market of anthropology is probably so small that it's super saturated. But the problem is so many people, like these floofy liberal arts students, they just feel like they have a calling towards anthropology. And then guess what? They're pouring someone's latte. And that's their career. It's like, oh, I got this expensive education so I can pour your latte. How the hell am I gonna pay back this freaking bullshit? And that's literally what these kind of, government guaranteed loans do. I mean, the student loan debt crisis that is forming now essentially is the same thing as the housing crisis in 2008, when these subprime loans were being guaranteed by the government for these freaking low-income families that had no way of paying them back. They probably shouldn't be buying a house of the type that they were buying in the first place, and this happened in mass. And then, of course, all these foreclosures happened. The banks could not, make back their profit, so the housing bubble popped. I mean, education is literally the same things happening as people who shouldn't even be getting loans in the first place because what they're studying is worthless. Or they're not even going to use what they're studying, and they're going to end up in some low-paying dead-end job because they're unmotivated to do anything that's actually productive. It's ultimately,
and the government
things they encourage these bad market decisions, and the same with subsidies. You're encouraging businesses to make bad decisions if they don't actually have to feel the fallout from their decision. If instead the taxpayer has to pay for it, right? Like, ultimately, these businesses should collapse, and so that their competitors can take over the market.
This is exactly what, the reason why Human Action is such a phenomenal book is not because it tells you that poor people should just die, because actually it says you look at the a posteriori, if you actually look at the marketplace in general and how it works, when you let the creative individuals, and that's what I love about Mises, is that he focuses on the smart people. He focuses on the industrial people. He focuses on the on these giants, the tech giants, the productive giants, and he says those are the people who are actually driving the economy, and not the government that keeps interfering and destroying the economy. What people will never understand is that they do not actually praise. They do not think of what is good for the smarter person. They actually think about what is good for the inferior individual. So that's how the government essentially works, is it actually tries to subsidize stupidity and penalize intelligence, penalize productivity.
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing is, in a market where you have to act smartly in order to succeed, you're not going to see, these sort of stupid decisions anywhere near as commonly because they'd be disastrous. And I don't think people would just, I don't think essentially getting rid of subsidies and guaranteed loans and shit like that, I don't think that would kill anyone. And honestly, if people, if someone starved because they couldn't take out a loan, then it's not because they couldn't take out a loan. It's because they weren't being proactive to secure their future in the first place. The thing is, what am I getting at? The thing is, without these things that essentially subsidize stupidity, people are forced to be smarter. They're forced to make better decisions. I don't think the poor are so stupid so as to just keel over and die, right? They're going to try and do something to live their lives better, right? They're, instead of going for a house that they would never be able to afford in the first place due to guaranteed subprime loans, instead they're going to choose cheaper housing. They're not just going to live on the street. I mean, to essentially view the alternative to these suburban dwellings, to view the alternative to that as street living is ridiculous. But, of course, people who advocate for government solutions don't see the alternative. They think if you don't want these things, then you must want people to die. It's like, oh, you're a murderer. You want people to not.
Well, this goes back exactly to your initial point, is that people will never observe the adverse effects of literally anything. They will only see what's literally, and the expression that I use, they only see 1 foot ahead of their faces. As they do not see what happens in the future. They cannot tell what is going to happen in the future as a result of anything, as a result of any policy, as a result of anything happening. So this is just a demonstration on the stupidity of the population, because the government ultimately is made up of the body of the population. Like if you have a population where 90% of individuals are smart, when 90% of the individuals are well educated, understand what's good, at least for them, then they wouldn't be voting for idiots such as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But she's a representation of the, let's say, the average of that community that voted for her. Because if you have,
I don't think so. I think she only won because of apathy in that community. Because that has always been a Democrat state. I'm not state, a Democrat-run district, and because the incumbent was a really weak candidate, so she was just able to jump in there and sweep up what few votes there were. Because only a tiny fraction of her district even voted.
So yeah, this is why the importance of actually voting, of exercising your right to vote. We'll say, well, I'll put that person out there. I'll put that person into office. The reason that it's important to divide that into states, localities, and voting places is because I don't want a person who's from New York to rule over Virginia, destroy Virginia. The problem is, and this is kind of an interesting thing, is what if the population around you, such that, let's say in every state, the population was large enough that your voice matters less and less. And this is an interesting thing, is that we're looking at the problem obviously from the wrong side. So I'll admit that we're looking at the problem from the wrong side, and I'll tell you why I think we're looking at it from the wrong side. We're saying, okay, if the population will increase, that the stupidity of the population will increase as well, because the average American, or actually if we take a sample of the population, we can at least determine that there's a massive proportion of the population has no idea what economics is. How does it work? What does it mean to make money? What does it mean to become wealthy? And how do you become wealthy? How do you actually achieve something in life? Most Americans are not interested in that. This is beyond their grasp. This is beyond what they're looking for. And this isn't to bash on Americans. If you actually go anywhere in the world, people anywhere in the world just have a very similar mentality. The mentality of people actually changes as productivity gets higher. So that's why you look at certain regions. For example, Switzerland has very high productivity. If you actually look at the average intelligence in there, it's really high. So the higher the productivity, that tells you that the intelligence in that area is relatively going to be high. Of course, measures of intelligence are skeptical, so there's a little bit something to make you a little bit skeptical about, because a lot of them are administered by academia, and we all know how academia. And this actually is a gateway that puts me in the right end of the problem. What if you have a population, but the population was not stupid? So we need to look at what made the population stupid. Is it whatever we put in the water that turns the frogs gay? Or is it, or maybe it's public education? And I have a serious beef with public education. Now, forget about the first case that we talked about, which is when Obama decided to have government loans for students rather than private loans, which is the stupidity that made so many people confident enough to apply for stupid programs and made all universities stupid enough to keep pushing these stupid programs, these stupid social programs. But when you had loans that were provided by private banks has to run an assessment on you to say, well, what are you majoring in? What will your grades be? I need to keep track of that so I can decide whether to keep giving you loans or not. That's why people who majored in very professional majors, they actually benefited more, because those people could get loans easier from those banks. And if their grades were higher, if they were more competitive, they can actually go to different banks and get lower rates, because those rates are based on merit. They're not just based on your immutable characteristics, or they're not the same for everyone. The government walks in and said, oh, I'll make it the same for everyone. And now so many people are getting degrees that are worthless and are just not paying back their loan.
Oh, but you don't want the government to be publicly funding people's education well into their adulthoods? You must want people to be dumb.
They already are
bad. You're bad doo-doo head who wants dumb people.
What's funny is if you actually privatize education, and similar thing with healthcare, if you completely privatize education and healthcare, what you'll see the magic of something start to work. The magic of something that a lot of people do not understand and have never grasped. Well, maybe if there's private education, they will start to grasp it over several generations. And that's called market economy. The reason why market economy succeeds is because there's competition. This is what a lot of leftists, or I'll say it, all Democrats, do not understand the idea of competition. They have never grasped the idea of market. And I think the mass majority of them have no clue what market economy is. So if you actually study market economy, the very basics of it it's just literally guided by the law of supply and demand. Oh, yeah. That where there's a gap in the market, someone is going to go in there and supply it, and if there's a need for it, that person is a lot of money. And this is essentially how profit is generated, is to figure out where that margin is between demand and supply, and say, well, there's no supply for this. I'll start this business. I'll work on it. That's why you work. That's why you can have healthcare, that hospitals that are completely privately run, unregulated by the government. Now, it's not to say that these hospitals are going to be flawless or they're not going to have any problems. Of course, you're going to have maybe a hospital or two that are hiring subpar doctors or using poor equipment. But guess what? There's competition. If there's a better hospital that offers better services at a competitive price, you will automatically go to that better hospital with a better price. And why would you do that? That's because that better hospital with better price is going to give you better treatment. Is going to make sure that it keeps its reputation up, because it has a reputation to keep. So once it is able to preserve its reputation, just because it's able to do that, they're going to thrive. They're going to benefit from you, and their reputation gets higher, which means their profit margin is going to get higher. They don't have to actually make a lot of profit from one person, but they can get thousands of people, and they get a small profit margin from the services that they offer. And guess what? That's exactly how every industry works. Every industry, as soon as it actually is able to meet its supply, what it does is it actually starts competing with other people who are meeting the supply-demand curve. So what they do is they actually reduce the price. They reduce their profit margin in order to provide the same quality service for their that their competitors are not doing, because their competitors are making more profit and they're enjoying. So this is what makes markets so fucking powerful.
Yeah, but my question to you is this: what is your response then, though, to the freaking socialists who will say, who will essentially point to the current American healthcare system and be like, well, the high prices of everything and the unattainability of healthcare for the poor in our country is evidence that everything that you just said is wrong. Right?
Well, what would you say in response to that person? This is the problem with them, is they don't actually ask what made the prices so high in the first place. Yeah. Why don't they look into that? Why don't they just look into what made the prices high in the first place? It is true for them to actually say, well, the United States has this price healthcare, but if you actually go to Switzerland, for example, and you get the same, let's say, surgery, and let's say everything else being equal, the surgery is going to cost you 1/10 of the price of what it could cost you in the United States. And you would ask the question, well, why the fuck I cannot get a lower price in the United States? They immediately run into the socialist agenda, not knowing that the government itself is what fucked up the hospitals in the first place. First of all, in order to open a hospital in any given area, do you know how many representatives from your district you have to lobby in order to start a hospital? You have no clue. Not only that, everything that you have to do has to be regulated by the state. The state has to regulate who becomes a doctor and who doesn't. So if you get someone who graduated, they cannot become...
The freaking supply of doctors, and it's been a well-known fact throughout the last few decades that there's a massive shortage of doctors in this country, and the reason for that is because the state medical boards throttle the supply of doctors at the behest of the AMA. The American Medical Association, conveniently made up of doctors, has been throttling the supply of physicians into the country for decades, and of course...
Well, who's giving them the power? Who's giving them the power to be able to do that?
The government.
The AMA by itself wouldn't be able to do that.
Well, yeah, because the AMA, they dominate all the state medical boards. That's how they do it. They dominate all the state medical boards, so they essentially have all the power.
So here's what the problem becomes: is that the state medical boards gets to decide who becomes a doctor and who doesn't,
Yeah.
who gets to become a nurse and who doesn't. And then when they have shortages, they just blame capitalism.
Yeah, that's essentially
it seems like the government is just blaming the capitalism for its own mistake. People around there who just are worshippers of the state, they do the exact same thing. They just blame capitalism for everything.
I mean, apparently back in like the 50s and before, like there were doctor practices where literally the doctor would show up to your house with a suitcase and attend to you at your home, apparently, from what I've heard. Obviously people can look that up and check to see if that's true or not, but apparently like you could pay like a few bucks for a freaking physician to visit you. But now it's like the price of medicine has inflated so much due to all these like this bureaucratic red tape that's been imposed upon medicine by government and of course by interested parties. You know, the interesting thing that a lot of people don't realize is a lot of government regulations on the economy actually benefit people in industry. And the reason for that is because it helps them shut out their competitors and it helps ensure monopolies. It's done it for the AMA in the medical industry. They essentially have a monopoly over the entire country's medical industry. And it does it in virtually every other industry as well. It's a concept called regulatory capture, which most people don't even think about. People don't even like know what regulatory capture is, but it's literally when a regulatory body essentially is working for the interests of the industry and essentially it's enriching these freaking wealthy, interested parties essentially, right?
So I would tread carefully right there, because when you were talking about producers and you would say some industrials will actually benefit more from these government policies.
Oh no, that's not producers. That's just people who are essentially mooching off of favors with government. A lot of people use the word crony capitalism to talk about that. It's essentially people who succeed in the market not necessarily due to their merit, but due to how well they can leverage government.
Correct. The other thing is it's the folks who actually can exploit the government to favor them over others. This is how the government creates monopolies. And I would dare anyone to challenge me that business itself can just corner the market by just creating one product without the help of the government, and they can just do it indefinitely.
Well, I mean, they can't. Without patents, you literally cannot control anything in any sort of technology field. Because as soon as you come up with an idea, someone else is going to start working on how to make it better. And if they don't have patents, then you're not going to be able to keep them from doing that, right? Stratasys, they were the first company to have 3D printing, but they had that back in the 1980s. I think even before that, possibly. The only reason why 3D printing is becoming big now is because all of a sudden their patents have worn off. So now all of a sudden all these different companies are popping up, and now there's a market for 3D printing where there wasn't a market before because of the monopoly due to the patent, which is, interestingly enough, why I'm against patents. It's funny, as an engineer, a lot of people would think that I should be for patents because it works in my interest. The only issue is that my interest is not short-sighted. I see my interest as in what kind of world do I want to live in, not my interest as in how can I gain short-term benefits due to government favoritism. And I'd rather live in a world in which technology progresses faster because people are more free to innovate on new ideas rather than it being criminal to innovate for some reason. Now, I understand the concern of some people. They don't want people to just copy their idea and make a buttload of money off of it. So, I mean, if we retain patents as a social structure, as a government institution, I mean, I do think at the very least patents should be dramatically shortened to maybe 2 years at most, so you have enough time to get on your feet and start making money off your product before other people come in and start making their own versions of it.
Or the alternatives to have patents not run by the government and have private industry actually being able to say, well, solve that problem. I've created an idea right now and I want to protect it. So how do I do it? And when you get the government out of it, when you say, okay, well, how do I do it? There's a couple of solutions. One of them would be more difficult to explain because I don't understand how it would work.
Like how the hell do you enforce a private patent?
What was that you were breaking up?
How the hell do you enforce a private patent?
So you can't really enforce a private patent, but what you do is you could actually represent your patent before you sign a contract with another company. Let's say the reason you created the patent, not necessarily for your own company, because for your own company, you can actually worry about it yourself. You don't have the information open to the public. You have the people who work with you sign contracts that they would not expose this information, and otherwise they would be harming your business. And a breach of contract can be contested in a civil court, so you can actually go sue the people in your company if they release this information. Now, what is the burden of protecting your own intellectual property? It really shouldn't be the job of the government to protect it, because it's going to be difficult for the government to protect your intellectual property. Namely, if I have created, let's say, a software or a design of some tool that can solve a certain problem, I should be able to conceal its function in some way. For example, if it's a computer code, I can hide the source code. I can write it and compile it in binary, for example.
Essentially come up with your own sort of like digital rights management software and whatnot.
Exactly. You can also buy a service that does that for you online, for example. There are a lot of ways you can encrypt something or reduce its quality in a way such that it's very difficult to reproduce.
How do you do that with machinery? When literally with machinery, all you have to do is just take it apart and look at the components and how they're put together to reverse engineer it.
I don't know because honestly, people can just open it and reverse engineer it, right?
Yeah.
Like let's say if you have a 3D printer, someone can just open that 3D printer that they just bought from you because now it's their property.
They can see all the freaking motors that you used, right? Like whether they're freaking stepper motors or brush motors and whatnot, and they're just like, oh look, use these motors, these fans, these.
Yeah, but why is that the problem of the producer? Why is that the problem of the consumer? Like, should the consumer be sued if they open up a machine that they own? Like, if I open the hood of my car, should I be sued because?
Yeah, obviously not. Obviously, that's ridiculous. Like, if someone wants to open something up and figure out how to fix it, repair it, or even build a new one, they should have every right to. And even if they wanted to start building them and start selling them, as long as they're not using my trademark, I think they really should have the right to do so. I mean, it might hurt my business in the long run because now other people are making money when they could be buying from me instead. But At the end of the day, I don't think that it's my right to restrict the propagation of an idea to people, right?
Right, but that's also predicated on the assumption that it's easy to mass produce a 3D printer by just looking and assembling one 3D printer. Then you have a lot to go into it because the more sophisticated a product is, the more mechanisms, the more machines that go into it, it'll be harder and harder for someone to reverse engineer it and tell you how to build another one from scratch that isn't the exact same thing, but it's similar to it in the functionality. Ultimately, it will create competition, but you as a producer, it's your job to innovate something more, to make your innovation even better, to improve on it, rather than to just say, well, I'll just sit on this machine and keep printing them and have the government protecting me so no one can ever come close to my design.
What about the concern, though, where, let's say, a big, massive corporation sees my design and...
One second.
Oh. Are you there?
Yeah.
So what about the concern where some massive corporate entity finds my design, right? They see I'm making money with my small business. So they just copy my product and start mass producing it, right? Will they, essentially push me out of the market, essentially, with my own product? Like, how does one circumvent that? And is that even, a likely situation to happen?
This is a possible situation. A possible situation is, it's a similar scenario if you have a small kiosk or a small shop and let's say it's a grocery shop, but someone else in the neighborhood decided to open a Walmart right next to you, and the Walmart is just going to put you out of business because who would shop at your small grocery store when they can go to Walmart, get something for a lower price, and get all their products that way.
Yeah.
So it's a very similar approach. Is that well, should we just take care of you right now? And the thing is I think no, they should not. What you can do is one very simple thing you could do is you can either sell your business to that big company, you can say, or just sell your business to someone else. That's it. You've been driven out of the market, and this will happen whether you like it or not. The problem is it would still be less damaging than if you had the government interfere in your business, because if you're
I agree with that, actually. A lot of people would be concerned that would end with corporate conglomerates just ruling every market in the country. But honestly, I don't really have an issue with that as long as they don't have the kind of institutional power that they get when they're able to leverage government for their ends.
Yeah, this is one thing that is interesting. Is I'm pretty sure another consequence to this, a lot of people will ask the question, well, now that I have this giant corporation, they can just buy everyone out. What they don't know is that those giant companies, yes, they do make profits, but the market system is not just a profit system. It's a profit and loss system, which means that those companies could be driven out of their ground. And the way that it happens is we've seen that in the past. You can have a small business that can actually maybe buy other business.
What, like Microsoft? Microsoft's just starting out of, small business. IBM is just like, oh, no, personal computers will never be a thing, right? There's no reason to invest in that technology. Then Microsoft and Apple show up, and now IBM is freaking tiny in comparison because they didn't jump on a new fledgling market because they didn't have the flexibility.
The exact same thing happened with Yahoo and Netflix. Did you know that? Yahoo was actually, they were going to buy Netflix at first. They said, well, no one's going to get Netflix. No one is going to care about Netflix. It's not going to be as big as it is today.
When you can just rent DVDs, right?
Right. They said, hey, you can just go to that, what is it called?
Blockbuster?
The red, what is
Red
that?
Box?
Red boxes, and just rent everything from them, and then you will never have to worry about that. So guess what happened? Yahoo is now being bought by Netflix. So this is like a historical thing that happened, and it's such a beautiful thing.
But that's the thing, that's the thing these people don't friggin' understand is they're afraid that the evil corporations are going to take everything over, and then the market's going to be stagnant, right? But that's not what history shows. History shows
not true. It actually shows that some markets can be dominated by a single entity that can do that. And that happened in healthcare and in education. And that's
and that entity is the
interference of the government.
Yeah.
Exactly.
A
lot of socialists will also come up to you with the claim, well, tell me this: how come every charity that we have is absolutely trash? And why is that? And they're right. A lot of charities, especially the charities that are meant to help the poor in America, are absolutely garbage. They're little to non-existent because the people who are actually trying to innovate, they would say, well, why the fuck would I do that? Why on earth would I do that? Why on earth would I provide you with anything? Why would I give money to other people? And why would I take money from other people? The reason they can't do that is very simple. Is because in order for them, the people who are giving them money would say, well, why should I give it to feed the poor in the U.S. when I'm already paying taxes, and that taxes go into government programs that just do that? And they're right about it. So that actually killed charity in America and made charity completely redundant because they just essentially destroyed it.
Well, that's the thing is actually America is still the most charitable country on the planet. We donate more to charity than any other country, not just in total, but in per capita. I'm pretty sure. I mean, obviously, I could be misremembering, but from what I remember, that's the case. But also, a lot of socialists like to point out that we have some of the worst social welfare programs, right? The thing is, I think the expansion of social welfare programs is probably inversely proportional to how charitable people are willing to be. Because in order to fund all these social welfare programs, you need taxation. You need to raise taxes in order to sustain the burden, in order to have a balanced budget at least. I mean, Denmark is an example. They're a capitalist country with, a massive welfare state. And the only reason why they're able to support that is because they also have a high tax rate. That's the only way to, pay for that kind of stuff. They've actually taken a sort of a more responsible approach to budgeting their resources. The only issue is, the only real issue is, of course, the high taxes. People are not, now, since they're being forced to pay for all these services, now they're not as able to buy the things that they would actually want. So I'd say they succeed despite their welfare state, not because of it. Honestly, I would rather live in a society with low taxes and no welfare state than a society with high taxes and a massive welfare state, simply because I believe in my own ability to navigate the market. I realize a lot of people don't really trust their own ability to provide goods and services to others at a profitable rate. But honestly, I mean, you just gotta freaking learn skills and be willing to trade them with other people.
Well, that's ultimately something that gets. Sorry. There's actually something else that I forgot to mention. It turns out that the problem with socialists is not because when you're trying to explain these things to them, it's like trying to explain math to someone who's never passed first grade math, or trying to explain, differential equations to someone who has no clue how to add and subtract numbers. So this is really difficult for them to grasp such concepts. But it turns out that the problem isn't there. You see, the reason why you can't explain differential equations to a 5-year-old is because they've never built the foundations to get to that point. You see, philosophy, and particularly the theory of values, is difficult to navigate. It's not easy to get to one point and say, well, now I understand all of philosophy. Now I'm good to go. You have to actually think about it, and you have to be really, really, really careful about the choice of words and the terms that you use, because they are very important. You see, a lot of socialists don't understand values. And the way you can know why they don't understand values is if you actually read about values in Das Kapital, in Karl Marx's book, which is, let's say, the more detailed version about communism rather than the Communist Manifesto. They actually think that values are intrinsic. And this is why there's no point of having these conversations with a socialist, because a socialist will never understand anything you say. Socialists will just assume that people exist in classes. There's the bourgeois class, and bourgeois has become an insult, and they made it as an insult. They made it, along with the word capitalist, as an insult. That's why I made my name on every gaming platform capitalist, because fuck them. They actually think that the word capitalist just represents someone who's ignorant, and the virtuous person is just the bourgeoisie. They don't understand that the bourgeoisie cannot exist without capitalism. That those people who are, quote unquote, the working class, they cannot exist without people innovating, creating, and making those giant businesses that they can hire millions of people, and those people become the quote unquote bourgeoisie. So the theory of values for them is just intrinsic, because they think that that every individual has an intrinsic value, and they get actually a step further than that. I talked to a socialist the other day, and guess what he said to me? He said, well, every individual, not only do they have an intrinsic value, they have the same value. And I was like, well, what does that mean? Like, that doesn't make sense. Can you elaborate on that?
Does a cripple have just as much value for the
ends
of serving in the infantry as a athlete? I mean, value has to have some sort of ends.
It gets better. This guy actually told me that he could do Jeff Bezos' job, that he could just replace him right now. And I said, wow, this is brilliant. Well, let's see where Jeff Bezos started. If Jeff Bezos started where he could, or not just Jeff Bezos, let's actually talk about Zuckerberg, for example. How did he become he's so young, he's about your age, and I was pointing to a guy who was roughly a little bit older than me. But I was pointing to him, and I was like, okay, let's think about it this way, right? You have this man who's that young who created something, and guess what? That man didn't really have a big capital to start with, so he didn't have a loan of $1 million, quote unquote. But that person was able to create, to innovate, to get to where he is right now, simply by creating values for other people. And actually, he created the market for his service. He did not. He created the demand for his service. He did not just fill in some gap. He actually said, what would be interesting, and this is actually something that I a little bit disagree with Mises on, is that he didn't just do it to serve people. He did it to serve himself. Eventually, he had this vision. He had something that he could do, and that other people can just benefit from it. And he did it, and he became this tech giant of today. And it's like I told him, if you think that you have the same value as him, if you think that you're no different than him, why aren't you a billionaire? Why aren't you a billionaire? Why are you just sitting here just complaining about taking his wealth or taking what he has produced rather than producing it for yourself?
Well, I mean, that's the thing is, that would require taking action and responsibility for your own life and moving forward and saying, yes, I am going to make something of myself rather than sit around bitching and moaning. But that's the problem is people like to sit around and bitch and moan about how meaningless and unfortunate life is and how life hasn't been kind to them. Oh, people like Zuckerberg were only freaking lucky, right? Oh, he only got lucky, right? They don't even understand that it was due to effort and skill.
This is why,
and I say that as someone who I freaking hate Mark Zuckerberg, to be honest. I think he's a freaking piece of shit who's too willing to censor stuff on his platforms. But that being said, I can't deny like the fact that where he is right now is because of his competence.
So this is something that is that they don't actually grasp, and the problem is, I don't think they ever will. This is a really, really interesting thing, is that I think part of it is because we have this massive divide in the nation as well, is that there are people. This is Jordan Peterson actually observed that. He said there's something that is worse that is happening in the U.S. right now, is that there's this divide that is going on between the right and the left. By right and left, he doesn't mean it just in terms of economics. He just means in terms of the values that they pursue. Now, I disagree with both the right and the left. But the fact that they're so segregated and they're sitting in their own echo chamber is not making things better at all.
Oh, yeah.
It's actually making things a lot worse. You have conservatives just sitting and talking with each other, and you have liberals, obviously, in their safe spaces, and they're not conversing with one another. They're not talking to each other. And it's getting to a point where all liberals see themselves as vastly superior to conservatives. And this is something that has become very observable these days. They just see themselves as just superior. And if they see themselves as superior to them, there's no reason to talk to them, even though, ironically, they also see themselves as the bourgeoisie, which is, if you read enough, it's the inferior.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that's because, most leftists are not full-fledged Marxists or communists just yet.
Not yet.
They're mainly just, influenced by the ideology. Just like, most right-wingers aren't going to know who the fuck Mises or friggin' Rothbard or even Ayn Rand are, right? Most right-wingers are just people who like freaking tradition, oftentimes religion, and freaking guns. I mean, honestly, both. I think both the left and the right, oftentimes they're not really even intellectually in tune with the, I guess, intellectual heritage of their own sort of political position, right? They're more just, they have certain desires and they run into other people who have those similar desires. So they band with the people who have those same desires, right? I don't think most people operate out of some sort of consistent political philosophy.
By the way, I'm going to leave soon, but before I leave, I wanted to tell you a couple of things. One thing is that Bill Barr, who I really don't respect, but he's saying that he's going to threaten that the Department of Justice is going to take legal action against state legislators or state governors who will keep making laws that are unconstitutional, even in times of emergency. So that's something that we can talk about either next time or that.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, actually, I called Representative Riggleman earlier today because I just had the thought, that I just think it's so friggin' messed up that so many people so many government officials, so many legislators have enacted, legislated and passed laws that are completely unjust, obviously, and also completely unconstitutional. And there are hundreds and thousands and possibly even millions of people in prison for laws that are in direct violation of the Constitution. It's just the very fact that there are some people in jail because they dared smoke a plant or own a gun in the wrong state or own the wrong kind of gun in the wrong state. It's abhorrent to me that there are people whose lives are being messed up, and yet these same people are sitting in their mansions perfectly fine as if nothing's wrong. It's like, no, these people should be put in prison. If you pass a law that's unconstitutional, and the victim should have the opportunity to press criminal charges against you, not just to sue you, but to press criminal charges. That should be how that works. And if the victim doesn't know or can't identify or necessarily, the people responsible, there should be a mechanism for essentially, there should be a mechanism for informing the victims of these laws who is responsible for passing them, right? So that they can press criminal charges.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think. And I think that would make legislators a whole lot more hesitant to just flippantly pass these laws as if it's nothing, right? Their lives should be in the balance, or their prosperity, their well-being should be in the balance when they pass laws that affect other people. That's
that's also something that is very interesting. What was I going to say? There is something else I wanted to mention earlier. But was it about Governor Blackface? No, I don't think it was. Although I sent you a link to his Twitter if you want to look at it. He has a lot of people are trolling. I think it's amazing. I think that's it. I don't think I have something else to talk about. I will definitely try to contact Denver Riggleman.
I didn't get in contact with him. I probably talked to one of his interns, but she told me she'd pass it on. I don't know whether or not that actually happened, but I hope it did. I like to believe it did. Honestly, I think we need liberty-minded legislators to get the ball rolling on something like this, because I think part of the reason why we just continue in this social decline, the reason why we just continue straying further and further from the Constitution, is because there are no ramifications for enacting unjust and unconstitutional laws. And honestly, it should be a crime. It should be a crime to pass a law that is unconstitutional.
So I think that which is an interesting thing. I wanted to send you that link by Bill Barr where he said they will actually they'll take legal action against governors who enact unconstitutional laws. He was threatening them with that. Although I think that he should have done that a long time ago, that the Justice Department shouldn't sit aside while governors would just say, whoops, I just keep making these unconstitutional laws one right after the other.
Well,
there's nothing you can do about it.
Obviously, you mean executive order, but at this point, executive orders are basically laws based on how executives in this country like to use them.
Right. And it's not to say that Trump is not at fault at this, because he's definitely at fault. As a matter of fact, I think
he does the same fucking thing.
He's the one I think who encouraged them to actually do it. So this is one of them. I don't think I have something else to talk about. I was gonna give some good news actually.
What is that?
We'll keep that for next call because I forgot exactly what I was going to talk about.
Sorry about that.
So yeah, I'm just going to watch my favorite TV show maybe right, and then fall asleep and go to work. But yeah, you know, some people say, and I had a conversation actually with my supervisor at work, and it's the kind of conversations that you have that are more, according to him, because he likes to fuck with me all the time. He was like, "It's gonna be like our safe space," and he's a dick. He doesn't believe in safe spaces. Obviously, he's an absolute. He makes fun of people all the time, which is great. I like that thing. Anyways, so I was talking to this guy today, and he was talking to me, and he asked me something that I actually didn't think a lot of people would ask, especially someone like you who's a piece of shit. He asked me. He said, "I want to ask you something," and I was having the conversation with him. I was completely not talking about what the current situations is happening, and he said, "You have been through a couple of scenarios in your life that you have witnessed." Kind of the fall of civilization. You've witnessed not only people are staying at home, that you know, with the chaos where the government falls apart, and then you would have to do something about it. You know, what actions you took and how was the experience for you. And he was talking to me about that. I really liked it because he was trying to ask me the questions that are like, I sort of know what would happen in these situations. For example, in Baghdad, Iraq, kid, when the government completely fell apart. People at first started robbing places, especially poorer people. They started going to government buildings. There weren't really robberies on individual people. They weren't really robberies, at least they weren't famous. But the famous aspects that happened was when individuals started just robbing government buildings. And they would start robbing offices. They would take all their furniture, whatever they had to do. But one thing that is interesting is that market never stopped. Marketing never stopped.
Well, of course it doesn't. I mean,
and here's why. Because markets, and let me just explain this a little bit. Markets or market economy is not something new. It's not invented. What's his name? Adam Smith didn't invent capitalism.
He observed it.
Market has been around forever, as far as we know, because it's a natural progression of human action. And this was kind of the gist of the chapter of the chapter called Markets and in Human Action, which I do think if there's one part of human action you have to read, it's the chapter about markets. You can forget about the rest of the book, even though I think it's really good. It's actually great. But the chapter about markets is absolutely amazing. It's really stunning. It will change your mind about economics a lot. I mean, it wouldn't change your mind by much, but for a lot of people, it will change their mind. But it will give you all the good tools to argue with if you want to make a good point, because it just puts your mind into these things. Anyways, in Iraq, what happened is, as the government fell apart, people started using different currencies. They actually started using the US dollar because the local currency was essentially worthless at the time. So people started working and producing, and they would actually get this monetary value. But believe it or not, even though there was no government, for a little while, we sort of survived until the government got back into the game, until they established another government. And this is the biggest problem that happened in the United States, is that America didn't really establish a proper government. They didn't establish a constitution based on the individual rights, because all the religious entities in the countries would not approve of it. And that's what made the divide even worse in that. But what happens is, when the nation is getting more and more divided rather than united, it's easier to be controlled from the outside. Not only that, it's easier to be influenced from the outside from different parties. I think a similar thing could happen in the United States is that some people could exploit the divide between the left and the right and say, well, now that those people are divided, someone is going to stand at least with one side and help them defeating the others, quote unquote. Now, obviously, you can observe that Marxists have been doing that for a long time. It's not something new, but the scary part is when other governments are going to, if they have not already, to interfere with, one side of the U.S. over the other. And obviously, in the Middle East, it's much easier because it's the religious aspect. There's no one questioning anything. It's just people who are religious questioning it, saying, we should do this, we should do that. That's a really interesting. But anyways, yeah, when things went to shit in Iraq, there was a period of starvation, but it wasn't really too bad. There were a few people starving, but it wasn't really a catastrophe to say. At least that wasn't the catastrophe. The catastrophe was religion, and there's nothing done about it at the time. The other thing is when Egypt, the revolution in Egypt happened, and people decided to overthrow their government. Although I didn't think their government was bad at all. Like coming from Iraq, I was like, your government is fucking great. They value free speech. Actually, they did value free speech during its era. That is that they had no laws restricting speech, really. Not to say that they didn't have a constitutional recognition of the right to free speech, but they had no way of determining. They had no way to limit free speech, but they did not limit it at the time. Like I remember talking to so many Egyptians, and they would just insult their president day in and out. They would insult him all the time. They would just say, "Oh, this guy's a fucking moron. He doesn't know what he's doing." And I was like, just the fact, and this is something that a lot of people take for granted, just the fact that you can insult the highest office in your country, which in the Middle East, the governments only have one branch. If you can insult the person in the highest office in the country and get away with it, you have some form of democracy. And this is something that they never grasped.
Well, not necessarily democracy, but you have some form of freedom at least, right?
Correct. I stand corrected, yes.
Yeah.
Some form of freedom. But people always take that for granted because freedom is never appreciated anywhere.
Well, we live in a horrible, cis white male heteropatriarchy that oppresses all the whammons and the colored people and poors, right?
Yeah.
It's
which is funny because there's one place in the world that colored people can't succeed in. It's the United States. So what do you make of that, motherfucker? So yeah. Anyways, that's about it. I wanted to talk about something else, but I don't think I did. It just flew off my mind.
Dude, the last bit about how people take freedom for granted is that was profound.
Which one?
Never mind.
No, you were breaking up. What did you say?
That last bit about how freaking about how people just take freedom for granted, right? They have no perspective on how it truly is to live without it, right? That was just that's just quite an insight, obviously you can talk about that because you come from the Middle East.
No. The only way I would describe it to you is, believe it or not, it's like losing your eyesight. You will never know what the value of having good eyesight. Well, not really good eyesight. I know in your case you wear glasses, but you at least can see things. At least you can drive a car. At least you can do that. Yeah. Now imagine losing your sight. Imagine you becoming completely blind. How will your life change? This would be the exact same thing if you lose your freedom. Yeah. You have no idea how valuable it is, how freedom is so valuable. It is unbelievable. It'll change your life forever. If you lose freedom, your life is just going to be deteriorating. Look at the Middle East. Look at the way it is today. Why do you think it is? Why do you think countries like Iraq never prospered and never can prosper?
Because they never embraced freedom. They've never embraced it.
They never embraced freedom. They never understood freedom. They never understood that I can just own myself. I can just live for myself. I don't have to live for someone else. So they've never experienced individualism, and individualism doesn't live without freedom. And freedom is taken for granted. The meme that you have sent me in the past, I think it's absolutely powerful, and it is the one that, you know, these times, the good times that we live in, they just create weak men, and weak men create bad times, and the cycle goes on.
Well,
anyway,
it's been fun talking, man.
Were you recording?
Yeah, I've been recording the whole time.
Okay, cool. So we'll listen to it maybe tomorrow. If you can send it to me, that would be cool. Although I don't know how would you be able to do that.
I think I'll just freaking post it, or I might just post certain segments of it.
Yeah, you can edit it. Just listen to it yourself, and then feel free to edit it. And I'll take a look at it tomorrow or something. All right, man. It's been fun.
See you around.
See ya.
Peace.